Oh gosh, what should we talk? What's everyone watching right now? That's a good question. Is there any
I've been watching much lately.
TV?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say the main English language TV I'm watching is Foundation on Apple TV.
I've been seeing like more of that, and
Yeah,
I'm
it's
like,
getting a lot more praise now, which is like I'm glad they continued it because like the first season was kind of like mixed. I really like this, but seems like a lot of the more sort of like plot-pilled population didn't really like how it seemed like it was about nothing. But like this season, it seems like more things are happening and the visuals have like upgraded even more. So people are enjoying it a lot more. And then Lee Pace's character has been getting a lot of praise because they're giving him like more outlandish plot lines. So yeah, enjoying that.
Wait, isn't Foundation also Asimov?
Yeah, I was gonna say that would make a great segue for today's topic.
Yeah, it's because of Foundation that I kind of like went on a little mini, like when it first came out. After I watched it, I'm like, damn, this is like one of the best things I've seen. And then I went to like learn more about because I guess he's part of like the sort of literary canon of sci-fi, but like I wasn't really exposed to him as much. I'd heard the name, but I wasn't really familiar with you know, you just know someone's name, but you don't know like what their deal is. It's like I knew like famous dinosaur writer, but I just didn't know what his subject matter was. But like learning about it and then making the connection that he was the three laws guy, three laws of robotics, and then also came up with the word robot. And then when I read like more of his work, I really got an appreciation for him. So it's because of Foundation that that was even exposed to this movie. So yeah, very.
That's so cool. I've had some multiple classes that I've taken have been kind of like sci-fi classes, and
yeah, same.
I had actually seen some Soviet sci-fi before, so it was nice to return to that today.
Because we've both taken the same class, but in different semesters. So yeah, and the class was specifically about Cold War sci-fi. So it was various American books and films and Soviet books and films, and we would just discuss them in connection to each other.
Yeah, and so it's cool when there's a crossover where it's like an American novel that then is adapted by the Soviets, like The End of Eternity, which we're talking about today with our guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Para. I guess I usually introduce myself as a comic artist, but I have a job in real life. But like the main thing I do outside of that boring day job is drawing comics, and then just generally being like an online internet presence. So the main place you can find me is on Twitter at the same at Paracelsus with Roman numerals, because I used to have an old account that got suspended. I made a new one, but I recently got the old account back, so like I'm technically on both of them now. But like long story short, I'm on Twitter at Paracelsus the second, and then I usually talk about like the same thing everyone talks about these days, just whatever in real life, and then just posting art, I guess.
Well, we're so happy to have you. We'll have all the links in the episode description so people can check your work out. My first question to you is, what kind of made you want to discuss The End of Eternity with us?
Okay, so I guess the main reason I thought this movie would be interesting for you guys to talk about, I didn't even know it was an option for me to be on it. So I'm obviously appreciative and thankful for the chance. But like when I first listened to this podcast, when I first found out about it, obviously from following Dollhouse Butcher on Twitter.
That's my Twitter handle.
One of the first episodes I listened to was the one about Battlestar Galactica. And I really enjoyed sort of like the appreciation for the sort of sci-fi that isn't obsessed with the wiki articles and world building, lore, pew pew. That was more like it had the bigger focus on like interiority and sort of like emotional relationships between people, that sort of thing. And obviously, when you then combine it with like the general aesthetics of that era, it kind of makes sense why it can be seen as a campy. So I figured that like this movie kind of, it's also sort of like 20th century sci-fi. It also has that very extreme layer of artifice where it doesn't really care if people think, oh, this looks fake. Like that's not really the point. Where like obviously there's some effects in this that are very impressive for the time, but the general vibe you get from watching this is that it's not really the point that it's supposed to look real. Like it's sort of, there's a very high layer of artifice. And in hearing you guys like discuss camp, like one of the early episodes when you guys always discuss the meaning of camp, the big talking points that I took away was that camp is always supposed to be artificial and like it's always supposed to be like an earnestness. Like no one is like sort of like snidely, or no one is detached or about anything. Everything is like 100% earnest. Everything is like super, all the performances are very elevated, and there's usually iconic costumes are part of like camp. So it just reminded me of watching this movie and thinking like, damn, this kind of like lines up with a lot of things. I actually watched it again like yesterday just to like make sure everything was still fresh. And like there was certainly a few scenes that I think, damn, I wonder what these guys would have to say about a scene if they talked about it. So yeah, that was the main motivation.
I'm glad that we're talking about it, because I don't think we haven't really talked about much camp that outside of like American media. And so it's nice to be like, okay, this is a Soviet sci-fi film, and there's elements of it that I'm like, oh yeah, this feels like a specific kind of aesthetic sometimes that I've seen in like other iconic like Soviet era sci-fi, like Stalker. Which Wikipedia, apparently the weird ravine, like reservoir nature space that the end scene is also where they like recorded some of Stalker.
But and also the soundtrack was done by the same composer for Stalker.
Oh yeah,
the soundtrack is really good.
Yeah. It's my favorite thing about the movie.
But it's also, as you said, like this kind of, this is 1987, I believe.
87.
And like, yeah, there's this like practical 80s sci-fi-ness that is, I think, universal to like an era of sci-fi that is absolutely so fun. Like, it's so right that I'm like, yeah, it does remind me of like the Battlestar Galactica we saw. It even reminded me of like Star Trek, just blinking lights, beep boops, like
any bit of Blade Runner as well in some.
Yeah. I was thinking of Blade Runner too, because of like having this kind of more like, it's electronic but also ethereal soundtrack that adds this like layer of
very
feeling like unreality almost.
The rejection of like typical film score aesthetics that are like more orchestral. This one is like in the extreme opposite direction, which reminded me of Blade Runner as well.
Yeah, and wasn't Blade Runner partially inspired by Asimov? I know it's based on the Philip K. Dick novel, but I feel like a lot of those similar concepts arise from Asimov.
A lot of the same themes of like humanity, the general vibe of like replicants are like robots, they exist and stuff. So yeah, very similar themes.
Yeah. So we should probably briefly give the plot of this film, since I'm sure most people haven't heard of it.
Yeah.
So End of Eternity, it's based on an Asimov novel, and it's basically like, it's a time travel novel or time travel story, but also it's definitely, as you kind of said, like a kind of a reflection of like humanity and control. Because there's this like group of people outside of time, and they're called the Internals, and they're part of eternity, and they like are observing and making changes to time as a way to kind of preserve what they like call like primitive history. Or I think primitive history is like maybe before the 24th
what they call
century.
then they basically, yeah.
That's the main, I mean, that's the
Yeah,
main gist.
so the way I usually describe it to people when I try to get them to watch is like it's subject matter is so crazy that this movie is from 1987 because it's doing all the same things that are becoming like very contemporary trends, like all this like multiverse timeline stuff. The way like the Loki Disney Plus show is so like neatly aligned with this story, where the general plots, if I can try and give like a sort of like concise thing, is that like there is a bureaucratic organization that exists outside of time that like maintains the timeline by making changes that they feel will be detrimental to the general arc of human progress. So just like TVA and Loki with the sacred timeline, this eternity organization has their own sort of vision of what the timeline is supposed to be. And the story is about a cog in that machine going on a sort of like emotional and mental journey of being committed to that project to opposing that project very violently, and like how he went from one extreme to the other.
Yeah, because the film starts with hearing about someone who fell in love with a woman, and it's like that, oh, we can't let this happen. And then that's what the plot is. The main character is Arthur Hanlon, I guess.
Harlan.
Yeah.
And then the woman is
Noise. Very
yeah.
That's another thing that I thought was campy about it, the fact that her name is literally Noise and she exists to distract this very obedient worker. And her name is quite literally Noise, so it's like he's distracted by noise. So very noise lambent.
I love her. I think she was my favorite character.
She was my favorite character in the movie as well. When I watched it for the first time, like not knowing, having zero context for this, I just the thing I wrote in my review on like LB Letterboxd was like how many sort of like it's insane to watch that character and like how many sort of like Hollywood archetypes would exist in the future, that like sort of like action girl, female lead sort of like archetype, and like she embodies it in like an 80s movie that was made in the USSR. Like it felt very anachronistic, her character in the movie, like the way she's introduced and the way like she's framed, like she's not sort of like, there's a way love interest usually gets introduced in movies when you think of like Joy and Blade Runner 2049. Like that isn't how Noise is introduced at all. It's almost like the movie don't want you to think that she's going to be a love interest, but then she ends up being that. So like it really caught my eye the way like the direction sort of like framed that character. Almost like knowing how the movie ends is sort of like telling you that like this person isn't exactly what you think it will be. And so like that entire character was just like really what made the movie for me. I almost wish there was like more of her, but like the amount that she's in is like very like apt, because so much of it is based on like Harlan not being sure about her deal, so we the viewer also don't have to be that sure of her deal. But like performance was really great. I really liked the chemistry between two of them. Like everything about her line deliveries and stuff was like just very compelling. Like it was just very magnetic screen presence.
To me, I think that's another element of what's very camp about this film is the fact that you can never quite tell what someone's motivation is or who's like there. I had multiple points in my notes where it's like, who's manipulating who? Wait, who's in control here? Harlan never is. He's just like, he's just there.
They Loki like in that sense, in terms of like things just happen to him and he has to react, sometimes physically, sometimes very often emotionally, but like he's always reacting.
Yeah.
And I guess that's also sort of like not typical for, I guess, sci-fi, where like when you have this movie, usually the lead is like, when you think of Blade Runner, Deckard is like calling the shots, he's in control, he's making things happen. This entire movie is like Harlan not being in control of his life and trying to desperately regain some kind of control, but like the situation doesn't allow for it. So that's another thing that made it kind of like novel for me.
Yeah, I definitely it doesn't feel like an American sci-fi film.
Yeah. Yeah, if it was, Harlan would be the most in control person in the movie.
It's almost like when you watch this movie, you can see all the parts where a Hollywood producer would be like, we have to change that. This has to go, this has to go, this has to go. Like, there's so many things, especially with the characterization of Harlan, that's sort of like American audiences don't really respond to as positively, where like we prefer action men to be sort of like, I guess, almost domineering. But like Harlan is not very, that's not really how I would describe him.
Yeah, I do think that the first scene where he meets Noyce is very fun. It was a little bit funny to me because she thinks he hates her at first, and I'm like, he definitely gives bad vibes. He's just like staring intently at her, and all like the dialogue goes away and you just hear music and he's just like blank face, like, and apparently in eternity there's no women, and so it was like this moment it was like protagonist misogynist moment, but no, he's just really, he's just never seen a woman before and then falls in love with the first woman he meets.
Yeah, the way gender operates in this movie is really interesting because Noyce is basically the only female character, and she's very much a kind of revolutionary sort of presence. Meanwhile, every other character who's in this big machine, it's these men, and like it's not directly addressed, which is great, but it's very interesting to read into just the way that these characters exist.
I was gonna say I think the gender of the film is really interesting too, because even though like it's not like like except that one line where it's like, oh, he hasn't seen a woman before, it isn't made apparent that, it's like they don't bring attention to the fact that this like eternity is run by these like a bunch of like old white men. But I think in the moments of dialogue where you see like Noyce like questioning like the kind of like ethics of eternity, there is that kind of that moment to like interrogate kind of the identity of these these people who think that they have the authority. I think there's even a line where she's like, well, who like why do you say what's the best timeline,
the best path for humanity? And she's almost having to like hold herself back, so it's like she doesn't want to shatter his entire world too much, so she almost has to like temper what she says to him, like talking to like a Stockholm syndrome victim, where you can't just like destroy the entire world immediately. You have to like gently, it's like she's trying to like give him an on-ramp to thinking about this stuff for himself. And I appreciated that the movie didn't just like, here is the magic sci-fi lady that's going to fix your life. Like, it would have been so easy for her to just like do exposition for him to explain how like everything he knows is a lie, because that's such a common like sci-fi thing of like this everyman, and then a femme fatale woman shows up in his life and just like completely tells him that everything he knew was a lie, and like explains, walks him through it, and then eventually he becomes even more powerful than her, and she like is in awe of his competence and stuff. So he definitely doesn't do that. Like I guess it's more, it's not as interested in that stuff generally. Like there's no fight scenes, there's it's not that type of movie essentially.
Yeah
And it does, for a lot of the runtime, it does feel like that's the entire world, this eternity. It's just this all-encompassing environment of just metal and these huge wires, and that's basically his entire life.
Yeah, now that you point that out, the fact that they spend so much time on these like just shots of water and grass once they get to the 20th century now makes sense, because that really is the first green that you see in the entire film.
And the first time she goes in his room, she actually asks him like, wow, don't you get like lonely and like isn't it so cramped and like cold and metal in here? And like he to him that's like his normal, I guess. But like when they go to you see the green grass, you see the flowing water. Shots really emphasize the water flowing. Like his only exposure to water is the tiny sink thing where he uses the splash on his head. But like he goes to 20th century and it's like there's like nature.
Yeah, that piece of like architecture, or not architecture, just like a machine in his room really cracked me up with its impracticality. He just like pulls something down from the wall and there's like no drain and there's just water that he has to like lower his head into. That was a moment where like there's no explanation for this. This is just sci-fi and it's ridiculous, but that's not really the point.
The phrase that I used to describe the production design of this movie to my friend was brutalist sci-fi. And I would contrast that with like I guess contemporary sci-fi, because like most times when people think of like sci-fi, they think of like either futuristic or cyberpunk, and there's lots of like bright flashing colors, advertisements, Japanese scripts, blah blah blah. But then this is like almost like Soviet sci-fi, where it's just like very industrial, very muted colors, lots of like function over form, the sort of like
committee. It's very Soviet is the thing. It's a lot of Soviet sci-fi has this aesthetic.
The like committee where they meet is indescribable. Like no color, it's just a round table and all the computers just sit in their chairs. Like that's
well, that is one thing that was like the first note that I wrote down was like this, like the second shot of the film, I think, or maybe not, it's like early shots of this like serious board meeting discussion, and behind the head there's just all these blinking lights, just all these blinking lights, and it's such a fun image to me,
and it leads to some very cool like touches of production design that I thought were like the fact that like the intercom system is like these metal busts where the eyes glow.
Oh yeah.
Where he threatens the senior medic, the head just turns and it's like Dr. Yamada. It's like that's every like sort of design touch that they do is in keeping in line with the aesthetic, and it's just such a very like evocative feeling, like the feeling of watching this movie.
There also the room where they have like the like time machine thing that sends them into different centuries has these like giant like faces, and like there is this kind of I don't know my art history well enough to have like quite the right word for
Soviet realism.
Look. Like, but I love this kind of big like metal face that has these wires coming out of it that look like tears.
I was gonna say it's my favorite face of all the faces in the architecture.
Which then when they go to the 48th century, there's also these like big hand and foot statues.
The weirdest scene in this movie was when he goes to Noise's house for the first time, and there's this like this theatrical performance of people. I couldn't even tell what gender the people were that were
they're like all wearing masks of like the same face.
And they were just dancing, and then I guess the dwarf character wearing the golden mask helmets that carried the food and left, and that guy ended up being like super important, but he doesn't say anything, he just observes. Like that entire 48th century, the production design was very, very like lots of greens, and it's almost like a prelude to what it would be, but like it was such a very it was a big contrast from what we've been, and then when we went there, it's like, oh wow, this place is very different.
That set is, to me, it felt like it was trying to replicate nature, but it was also very fake. Like it was this really fun middle space of the Eternity building and the 20th century that they later go to.
Even had like water fixtures where there's like turtles swimming and stuff, and that's the only time we see animals in this kind of movie. is in Noise's house.
But it's also, like Fabiola said, yeah, that's all indoors. It's all
Mhm.
constructed.
It's still artifice, yeah.
Yeah. I also love the costuming.
Yeah.
My favorite piece is that first like dress thing
Yeah.
that Noise is wearing
with the open hips.
Yeah, and the red tights as well. Like it's all entirely red.
Mm-hmm.
I think the note that I wrote down was that it's sci-fi but also 80s, a sleigh. I loved that kind of out of timeness is absolutely, it's not just in the set design, it's in the costuming as well.
Yeah. Everything indoors, the sort of like eternity security guard people who were wearing like sleeveless suits with like ties, and the dudes that were asking him for his ID, like they had very specific fashion, and like even Harlan's fashion was very sort of like, it kept to the same silhouettes, but like it was always distinct, and it had like AH initials, which I thought was was very distinct because no one else has those initials. And the costumes that they wear when they travel to between like white padding and stuff, very bizarre. That was also very notable. Like,
Noises especially looked really impractical, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, she looks like she's going for like a drive in a sports car or something.
Almost look like fencing gear with the shoulder pads and the crotch protection. Like, very, and like the horizontal trim. Yeah, very nice costumes.
Yeah, one thing that I really like about sci-fi in general, but specifically sci-fi made during the 20th century, is how they can't quite escape the moment that they were made in, especially with the production design. Like as far in the future as this film is set in, it still looks like the 80s.
Yeah, especially with how analog their sort of like vision of futuristic technology is still so analog. Like when they're calculating people's life plans, they still have to insert cards and like physically remove them. And everything is like so sort of like tactile. There's wires, there's like keypads, everything is like, the sort of like shorthand, lazy sort of like vision of the future is always like holograms and like lights technology. But like I really appreciated that this felt very tactile, and it was like you could almost smell what eternity smelled like. And
and there's that one scene where they're like, oh, Connor probably sent us a message via the advertisement, so we have to go through every page of advertisements that we have from a span of 400 years, and they're just flipping through pages for like 5 minutes.
That whole scene was one of my favorite. Sort of like the first time I watched it, I'm like, damn, you could tell the Goskino censors went crazy on this one, because like the lecture that he gives of like explaining how you can actually learn more about a society from the advertisements than like books. And they give the example of like, if you read books of the 20th century, you won't know much about the sport of tennis. Like they might mention a tennis ball, but they won't explain what tennis is. But if you see an advertisement for a tennis racket, you learn everything about tennis in just like 2 pictures. And Cooper even asks, like, why would a seller say the shortcomings of his own product or something like that? And also like that entire conversation was just so sort of like thought-provoking, of like people in a sci-fi movie that's futuristic, they're talking about advertisements and like critiquing the value of advertising. But like when I watch American sci-fi that's set in the future, it's just taking for granted that like in the future there's holographic advertisements everywhere, because like advertising is just part of life. And it's just like, just seeing a movie even question the value of advertising in itself, of like, is this really like a key sort of like, curiously, it doesn't even say that it's a negative. Like you would expect that a movie like this would be like, oh, advertising is so evil and wrong. But it's like, no, advertising can teach you things. Like you can discover more about a culture from looking at how they advertise things than even what they deliberately wrote down. And I guess in the book itself, one of the sort of like plot points that's like more emphasized is that when Cooper goes back, he communicates using the adverts, and he communicates using a mushroom cloud. And like no one in the time period that he went to would have known what a mushroom cloud was. So yeah, like the advertising component is very like important, but less so in this movie.
I definitely took note of the entire notion of advertisements in this movie as something that's camp, since advertisements are not entirely truthful and they are meant to sell something, but they also very much do tell the truth about a culture, as you were saying, and that feels very camp in the sense of artificiality as the truth of a society.
And like even like the whole idea of nostalgia is so often like the most surefire like way to recreate nostalgia is like advertising. Like even entire subgenres of like vaporwave and future funk and stuff, it's always like Pepsi commercials and things like that. Even like the recent wave of 2000s nostalgia that's like gripping us now, recording this in like 2023. So much of it is like nostalgia for products that were sold to us primarily through advertising, like the sort of like a Pepsi ad that went viral recently because the very modern song sounds like it was a soundtrack to a 2000s Pepsi commercial. And even just like this is the sort of general fascination with advertising with respect to it being an easy approximation of an era's aesthetics, like the recent Disney, the WandaVision Scarlet Witch show. The gimmicks of that show was that it was like reproducing every decade's like sitcoms visually, and the main like bookend was that every episode had an advertisement that was in the style of that decade's advertisement, and as it went forward in time, the advertisements also went forward in time too. And it's just like it ended up being such a good example of how like more than anything else, adverts are what sort of encapsulates a decade's sensibilities. Like the best example is just Mad Men, how everyone knows that like Mad Men exists just for like 60s advertising, and like everything in Mad Men is what we see, and the entire show is literally about advertising.
I also find I think something that I find really interesting and compelling about Harlan as a character is that even if he's not always very emotive, he has a passion for things that like no one else does, and like he sees the value in it, which it's compelling in the fact that like, you know, there's like these jobs in the eternity to be sociologists, and their jobs are just like to keep track of like what's going to change so they can, you know, further control these like reality shifts. And Harlan is like actually exhibits and, you know, gives these speeches that have an actual like sociological like perspective of this thoughtfulness about culture and history, and it sets him apart. And even though I think like he's motivated to make the decisions that he does in the end because of his, you know, his love, like there's also like there's a reason that probably it was always going to be him, because that appeals to her and to try to convince him, because he's like going to be interested in history.
The way I conceived this when I watched it for the first time was that Harlan was like a Stakhanovite and the rest of them weren't. And just to explain for viewers, like Stakhanovites were people in the early Soviet Union that like went above and beyond their like expectations at their work because they were committed to like building socialism and stuff. So like they would like do extra work. They would like, if they were expected to produce like 20 tons of coal, they would make like 40 tons, and they would go extra, and they like took great passion in their work. And like it was sort of like movements to like not just go to work, but like also be passionate about what you do and like be extra productive. And Harlan at the beginning exemplifies, almost to the point of like irritating his superior, Finge, his like commitment to his job and like his sort of like technical proficiency leads him to be sort of like almost an outcast because everyone else has sort of like this sense of resignation about what they do, but Harlan doesn't. Harlan takes great joy, even the fact that when he's teaching Cooper about his job, he doesn't see it as like anything irritating, or like, because most times in movies like this, when a sort of like experienced worker type of like dude is asked to take on a rookie, we see it as a sort of like buddy cop dynamic where there's an experienced cop and there's like a always police in American media, experienced cop and like rookie cop, and he has to like show him the ropes, and there's always like resentment and there's sort of like dismissiveness, but like no, Harlan is very like excited to teach this new person about like the joys of learning about the primitive timeline, and like he's very passionate about his work, and his work is observing, and he's a technician, and other people that he interacts with in eternity, we can always subconsciously intuit that they don't have nearly as much passion for their jobs as Harlan has for his, which is why when he starts to shift, like his conversation with the sociologist was very interesting to me, because he almost immediately saw through like everything the sociologist was like trying to do. And even when the sociologist tried to like counter him, he could very effectively sort of like pinpoint the sort of like fragility in the sociologist's like outlook compared to him, because everyone else except for Harlan has a very sort of like, I would say, end of history mindset with regards to their work. But Harlan is almost like a modernist with respect to his work. Like he still believes it's almost metatextual, where it's like Harlan still believes in socialism and the rest of these people don't almost. But it's just like, yeah, like Harlan is basically the only person who doesn't understand why everyone else can't see eternity and like existence the way he does. And everyone else sort of like is a lot more cynical than him. And like, I guess the movie sort of exists to sort of break him down. And he really succeeds in that, I thought. And something else to add that's interesting about the movie is that the book actually has a different ending, but the movie's ending was actually changed. And I think the ending that this movie went with like works a lot better, like as a story. Obviously, there's context that like this movie was obviously changed to be more in line with Soviet values, which people can feel however they want about that. Like I know I was reading some of the other letterbox reviews about this movie, and people didn't like that it was changed, but like I felt like it enhanced it. Obviously, my own politics would like affect that, but like the fact that the whole movie, almost the subtext of this entire movie, is that like everyone is saying that it's inherently wrong for there to be a sort of like central bureaucratic organization that decides the best path for humanity. And as an audience member, you're almost inclined to agree, like, yes, people should be free. But this movie is interesting because Harlan actually does the supposed like Hollywood ending. Like he does blow up eternity at the end. He does sort of like, he does what Noise wants him to do. He blows up the eternity at the end. Like quote unquote, like he wins. Like if he told someone the plot of this movie that Harlan was trying to destroy eternity, he does. But we see from the ending that it had the opposite effect of what he wanted. Because just for people that haven't watched any of this movie, is that Harlan discovers that Noise. You guys don't do like spoilers. It's okay to talk about.
Oh yeah, go ahead and say all of it. Like,
so the ending of this movie is that Harlan falls in love with Noise, who is the woman from the 48th century. But like,
she's not actually from the 48th century.
And over the course of the movie, Harlan at first believes that he is trying to save Noise because the Eternity organization believes that there are like incorrect beliefs in the 48th century that Noise embodies, and their goal is to root out those beliefs. And so they task Harlan, hoping them to take the right course of action to like erase that timeline. And Harlan, in doing this job, falls in love with Noise for all the reasons that we talked about. And so he resolves to like rescue Noise from being destroyed. And so he takes her from the 48th century, hides her in the sort of the part of the timeline where eternity can't reach for plot reasons. And then when he goes back, he wants to save Noise. So he goes to the sociologist, and he asked sociologists, like, please help me calculate a life plan for this person and see if the changes will affect her. And then he learns that not only will the changes affect her, to begin with, she doesn't even exist in the 48th century. So that's what sets his gradual descent into sort of like madness of like, where is this woman actually from? And we, the viewer, begin to suspect that like, oh, she might be from the hidden centuries, because why else would she sort of like know so much and pretend to know so little and stuff like that? But long story short, when we get to the end of the movie, he finally confronts Noise when they both sort of like convince eternity to let them go to the 20th century. He finally confronts her and he's like, I suspect you as being from the hidden centuries, and you lied to me and you used me as a tool to achieve your goals of destroying eternity. What we had wasn't real. It's this really heartbreaking scene of like the scene that's in every movie of like, I trusted you and you just used me. Was our love nothing?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And you really feel for him in the moment, and the performances are so good. And Noise basically just doesn't know why he can't take the win. Like, all he wanted throughout this movie was to be with Noise. And he, at the end of the movie, is with Noise, but he can't take the win because he believed in the dream almost. And to find out that Noise, just from the very start, had already decided that eternity had to be destroyed, even when she was making him fall in love with her, even when they were doing all that stuff that they did together, she never believed in it. And to him, that's like a bigger betrayal even than like anything his old bosses did.
Yeah.
So like, very interestingly, he decides that like, I'm going to blow up eternity, yes, but also I don't want anything to do with you because like you have betrayed me. And so like he does this big dramatic thing of like he blows up the time traveling kettle that they came in. A very insane name for a spaceship.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a while there I was like, what is this kettle that they're referring to? And it's just the ring things that they go into.
It's like any of the time travel machines. It's a kettle.
the teachers and the doctors and the computers, the nomenclature is very cool. So like he blows up the time machine, and then throughout the course of the movie, we're led to believe that like if he blows this thing up, eternity is destroyed basically. So he destroys eternity, and the end result of like everything he did is like he basically wakes up in 20th century West Germany, basically in capitalism. And he sees this sort of like fancy Rolls Royce like pull up to a big like office building. And the people who come out are his superiors from eternity, Twistle and Finch. And so his big sort of like dramatic, grandiose gesture to destroy the evil bureaucratic organization once and for all, and like finally humanity can be free once we get rid of the oppressive central committee. It turns out that it just created capitalism, and his superiors from back then are his same superiors right now. They're just billionaires, and like just like before, he's still a cog in the machine. He's still not important. It's just the ending stuck me because it was so sort of like I want to say prescient of what happened to the real life USSR, where there were people from the USSR who felt like, why do we live in this oppressive, centralist, top-down society when we could be living under free capitalism? The end result was like neoliberal bureaucracy and stable lives. And it's just like, I guess the movie is just like asking us to really question whether like these freedom fighter narratives of I guess oppressive centralist institutions are actually always what they seem to be. And I just thought that was very especially with how the movie starts, you wouldn't expect that that's how the conclusion would be. So yeah, what were you guys' thoughts on like the ending in general, especially knowing that it was changed from the book, and the book ending was that he doesn't get to act. It just turns out that like when Noise tells him the truth, the time machine just disappears, and like Noise won, like eternity was destroyed. Yeah,
that's fascinating.
So there's like no afterward of him seeing the world, like the entire. I really like the movie ending.
Yeah, the book just ends that like that's the end of eternity and the beginning of infinity, because Noise's worldview in the book is that by the point of the hidden centuries is that there's infinite timelines. that branch out from all the possibilities, but eternity is obsessed with just maintaining one timeline, and it prevented basically the thing about like space travel. It was more important in the book because the whole thing in the book that Noyes tells him is that basically eternity always prevented humans from learning space travel sooner because they saw it as like less safe. So the end result was that every time humanity ended up discovering space travel, it was too late. All the other spacefaring civilizations had like left them behind, and they always became depressed and died out. So Noyes wanted to destroy eternity so that humanity could learn space travel sooner. That's why the whole like sociologist scene. One of my favorite shots in the movie was when they do like the crystal ball of like the chip that puts his hand into the ball and pulls out the chip, and he's like, "You can keep it as a souvenir." I'm like, "Damn, what a cool shot!" And like, it's just
that was a great moment.
But yeah, the changed ending, the Soviet ending, I preferred it a lot more to just Harlan being a passenger, because I like the futility of like him actually doing the deed of destroying eternity, but like psych is meaningless. Like no matter what, you will live under some form of I guess some form of society where you're not truly free. So like
I definitely, I didn't read as deeply into like resulting in a capitalist society, but for me my interpretation was definitely that like, oh, he never had control. Like even when he acts and has like makes this choice, that there, you know, there are always superiors, there are always people still watching him, and like and also like I was definitely like, wow, what a final like scene between Harlan and Noyes, because like I believe her that she did love him, but like of course how is he going to be able to stay with her after that? Like he was constantly a puppet, and I think that like, I don't know, just seeing that like, that he's not free.
The tragedy, I guess you can say the tragedy is that she wasn't like forthcoming with him, because there's definitely a version of this where she can tell him the truth and he might not be okay with it immediately, but he might come to live with it, he might come to accept it. But like being robbed of the choice, just being a tool, is the unforgivable thing for him. And like for Noah's perspective, we don't see how she reacts, like, because he just walks away. But I agree that she probably did love him, and it was probably real to her. But that's always the way the cookie crumbles in these stories, where she's committed to a bigger cause, and our protagonist is never from that same world. And so it's always like, it's more about her for the protagonist, and for the love interest, it's always about the bigger cause. But like, why not both?
What did you think, Fabiola?
Like I said, I really liked the ending, and I do think it's really fitting for the time that this film was made, because the Soviet Union was at a very similar place as Harlan was, in the sense that it was really disillusioned with its current state, but also disillusioned with capitalism as well. And a lot of, from what I remember of the class that we took, a lot of the later Soviet works do have this very similar tone of just being disillusioned with every single system,
especially Stalker.
And I just really liked how such a dense script is also able to exist in this very artificial setting. Like it's all very like, they're all very clearly sets, but they're not like traditional sci-fi or American sci-fi where where it's very entertaining all the time. Most of this movie is just dialogue and people having these really dense and philosophical conversations.
It's literally a movie about bureaucracy. Like, I couldn't believe what I was watching. Like, it's a movie about committees and planning, and the sets felt so lived in, and there was a lot of verticality to everything. Like, people were walking downstairs and people were moving around in physical space, touching things. It's sad that like in modern cinema, blockbuster cinema anyway, that's becoming so rare, where people are like walking around in a physical space. Everything is so sort of like volume background, orange purple lighting. Like, just seeing this level of production design, and like just like the physical production of the movie be such an important aspect. Even in there's that entire set of like the school where they train like the cubs.
Oh yeah.
And that set is in the opening scene, but it was like a full set with like a grand staircase and like classrooms and everything. And just like, damn, this level of commitment to production design, like it was really impressive to see. And the same with the soundtrack as well. Just after the movie was really good.
To me, I also think there's something camp about the fact that like it's these very serious intellectual conversation using words like, you know, time change, like, you know, they're all like, everyone's, you know,
these all when council.
or time as was it wish for time.
It
was one of the favorite things I wrote down. And in these, I'm assuming because it was an American novel, that then these are like translations into Russian, and that they're then like subtitled again. But
when they swear, they say by time. It's just
I love that they still said doctor, like they kept the English word doctor.
Oh yeah, they did.
The names themselves are so English, and just hearing these Soviets say these very Twistle, Binge, Harlan, and it was just very, I guess that's also campy, these names. There's very few named characters, but all the names are very memorable. Like I found myself like, oh yeah, that's Twistle. He's the doctor guy. And the whole subplot with like Cooper, it's not that important in this movie, but it's kind of more important in the book. And like the way they handled that character, I found it very cool, because right from the beginning, we see that, wait, this guy has the same face as the famous scientist who created eternity. So like he's important, but the movie almost doesn't care about him. He's just like, oh yeah, he's there. Don't worry about him. He'll pop up soon enough.
And then it's like, whoops, we lost him. Well,
and they
gotta get him back.
It carries on, And I love how much time they dedicated to just showing like the daily life in eternity, like just seeing the way these guys were just like just their daily grind, like making PA announcements, just doing so much like business as usual. Like I found that a very interesting like juxtaposition with like the urgency. And it's so funny, like reading my first review of this movie, I gave it 4 stars, and my only gripe was that I said that I wish the story didn't meander as much, where they're taking time to show us what's happening here and what's happening here, because in my mind, I'm like so anxious to like learn about like noise, like where is noise? Why can't they go to the hidden centuries? Why was the block put on the kettle to go past 10,000? But watching it again and being able to just like, because I already knew how it would end, I could enjoy it a lot more that was taking its time to like show us the full complexity and the full sort of like not trying to just beeline to a plot resolution, but taking time to actually like live in the world. I appreciated it a lot more, because I think it would have been a shame if all that effort in the production design was just stuck in deleted scenes, because we needed to do the save the cat plus, hit the next. Like I like that we took its time and wasn't like hurry to resolve anything. And obviously it just added to Harlan's anxiety, because Harlan is the only one that feels any sense of urgency. And everyone else is just like, dude, why don't you just chill? Like, time. Why are you in such a hurry?
Yeah, it would be the same if the plot also had an urgency.
Yeah, I think that also, the way this film fits into time travel narratives is fascinating to me, because I love time travel. And I, as much as I love it, it's usually like I like it for the plot. I like it for the way it fits into the plot and like a puzzle piece. And this is a time travel and like story that is like, oh, it's just about the concept of it and the philosophy of it and about the control and it like, I feel like every other sci-fi film with time travel does have that urgency of like, we need to control things, or like, and there is a little bit like, well, we need to close the loop, but it's not like we need to close the loop for the plot, but we need to close the loop like for our control.
And it's literally not like, it's not even like we need to close the loop today or else the world will blow up. It's just this one Dr. Twistle has a personal agenda of wanting to close the loop, but if he doesn't, life will go on. Like it's just a personal achievement thing for him. And like my relationship with time travel, like as a comic fan, like it's a lot more sour because everyone knows that like in comic books, time travel is always sort of like the laziest possible plot that could induce cheap drama of like wanting to just navel gaze at like past canon and stuff like that. So like I find myself these days a lot more fatigued with like the multiverse, parallel universe, timeline obsession. Like it's all the rage now, and like I just have to take the L since everything everywhere. But like I'm personally not as much as a fan, but like this movie, when I watched it, I could not believe like how novel it felt for a time travel story. Like everything was just so fresh to me. Like the approach, the preconceptions, the sort of like initial assumptions that the story has about everything going in, like even the way it like handles the actual mechanics of time travel, which is to say it doesn't even care. Like
yeah.
There's never a scene where someone gives exposition about how the kettles work or everything. It's just like it's just matter of fact. Like the
it's kettles. Like, yeah, we figured that out. 24th century, we figured out how we could time travel.
the first scene where he tries to time travel with Cooper and Twistle stops him and calls into his office to explain why he shouldn't time travel was the closest the movie got to any sort of like exposition, and I still had no idea what anything was supposed to mean. Because you're just not supposed to care. And it was just so refreshing to watch a time travel story that just isn't like bogged down in explaining the wiki article for the fans who are like eager to construct a canon. I don't know how you can construct a canon for this movie because like it just rejects all of that and it just laser focuses on these characters and like their relationships and like every named character has a level of interiority to them where you can fully understand why every single relationship they have to every other character, you can fully understand. It's like why Finch hates Harlan, why Harlan hates Finch, why Twistle is just done with everything. Like you can understand it. And like that's such a novel approach compared to like a very we have to do the thing before the thing. Like if J.J. Abrams did this movie, every scene would be 90 seconds long because he would be too afraid of the audience getting bored, and there would be like 6 more different MacGuffins that they need to find to make something work. The entire structure of the movie would just be so different. And then obviously there would be no sex scene, no nudity. Everything with noise would just be like it would just be on the chopping board. Oh, that's not important. It's like the tiny intimate moments that they had were so nice of just them like
beautifully shot and choreographed.
Every reunion that they had was just so touching. Every time they're separated and they get back together, it's like the best. And my heart just melts. I'm just like, oh my God, this dude was really ready to kill himself being separated from this woman he just met for a few hours. He's ready to throw everything away. And like just the touching moments where he's like, run away with me. And she's like, okay, but like where? Like it was very touching in the moment. And it's like stuff like that is the kind of thing that I wish modern cinema would do more instead of being so addicted to like not like just being afraid of the audience getting bored. Like so much of this movie is technically boring, but like those are my favorite parts when I think of them. Like this movie doesn't have a single like action scene.
You know what this discussion reminds me of is one of my favorite quotes, which we've kind of already referenced the conversation, but the specific thing that Noyce says when criticizing Eternity is that she says that they're not actually making progress. They're just approaching mediocrity. And to me, I was like, that insight to me feels so relevant to how camp fits into Hollywood right now. Of like, there is this, let's get the perfect films. Let's have perfect control, and it's like you just get mediocrity, and camp is
there's no sense of risk.
Camp is the risk. Camp is the let's destroy eternity. Now, hopefully it doesn't actually lead to what the end of the film is, but
I think I like that reading a lot. The idea that like this movie is almost metatextually making a case for Hollywood's stagnation, being the obsessive sort of like desire to control the exact sensibilities of like even wanting to predetermine what reviews will be like, almost like preemptively responding. it's a thing that like me and my friend who always like watch these movies together, we constantly talk about when we watch movies together. I was like, why are these scripts already responding to their reviews in the script? Like they're almost like guessing what reviews will be and trying to respond to the reviews in the text. I'm just like, can you just make the movie and just let the movie speak for itself? Like this whole argument is that you say you want the best part, just like Hollywood wants the best movie, but all you're getting is just like a mediocre, overly safe, overly cultivated, just like ultimately personality-less product instead of something that could have all the risks, all the color, all the flavor. Maybe it might piss some people off, but like you did something that mattered, and it's just like
and it's I love that this is an interpretation that can really only be pulled from not the context, the exact context and era of the film being made, because that also feels to me meta, since it's a film all about like time periods.
Yeah, it feels universal yet specific at the same time.
That's what I've been trying to get so many people to watch, is because I see the sentiment of like people tired of multiverse, people tired of time travel, and I'm like, there's this one movie, very obscure Soviet film. Like if you watch it, you will really see how much better it does these topics, and like it almost like revitalizes your interest in this, because you feel that like, oh, there's actually more we can do with these topics, and like it doesn't have to be the same cultivated just the same soup over and over. Like it can be it can just be more sort of like passionate. And I guess that's ultimately like my biggest takeaway was that there should always be joy and spontaneousness in these ventures, like in making movies and like doing anything artistic. You shouldn't try to like optimize it, which is the entire message of eternity, of like we're going to like optimize every aspect of human existence, and like that just creates miserable people. You don't want that. And I guess maybe that's also something campy. Like I tried to understand more about camp before this episode, and my biggest takeaway was that you can't sort of like, camp is not supposed to be overly sort of sculpted. Like you can't set out to make something camp. Like camp has to just be what that thing ends up being. Like it has to be just your earnest, sincere like efforts to make something, and then the end result was that it ended up being campy, and that's just something you have to live with and accept, and you can't just like approximate it basically.
I have often felt that camp is this kind of impossible mathematical equation, because like so many factors need to be like at the right place at the right time and the right story, and it's kind of impossible to decipher, but when it happens, it happens.
One of the examples that Notes on Camp gave was like the entire medium of ballet is camp. I kind of this conversation has kind of made me understand why that is, compared to something like hip hop. I don't think hip hop could ever be camp, but something like ballet, in just everything about it is just, even from the costumes to the music to the hairstyles to the shoes that they wear, everything just feels like that.
This conversation has given me every conversation we have on this podcast gives me such like a new appreciation for the kinds of films that can be made. and I'm so glad that you brought this film to us, because damn. Nice reminder. Watch Soviet sci-fi films.
There's always something fun in there.
Like the production company that made this Moz film, generally regarded as one of the best sort of like production companies in the USSR, and like a lot of their movies have the same sort of like aesthetic and sensibilities. And the next one I plan to watch is called The Amphibian Man, and it's supposed to be the thing that inspired Shape of Water, or that they won't acknowledge, but like it was like, it's the same sort of movie about a sort of like waterman creature that falls in love with a human woman, and he's like a science experiment thing, and like it's supposed to be very similar to Shape of Water. So like that's the next thing I plan to watch. And like looking forward. Watching this kind of like made me more enthusiastic to watch old movies. which I kind of think.
Oh, that would be a great episode one day of discussing how maybe Guillermo del Toro explores camp in his work. But yeah, that definitely, I think there's modern, like current day filmmakers who take like a kind of reference and inspiration from older genre types always to me have this little like that an emphasis on style always.
Would you say Wes Anderson is in that category? Because there's been so much talk about Wes Anderson aesthetics and like how to replicate Wes Anderson's style. Like I'm curious what you think about him as a like aesthetic driven filmmaker.
I think it's aesthetic. I haven't seen, like Wes Anderson films I've seen like are Fantastic Mr. Fox, Grand Budapest, Rushmore, Forever Ago.
Not Asteroid City, right? The one you haven't watched Asteroid City from this year.
No, I really want to. I
haven't yet watched that one, but I've seen most of his films. I think so.
I think Asteroid City is his best. I really love this.
Yeah. I wish that there's something about his exploration of gender that just never feels like it goes deep enough for me. But maybe that comes from you have to find that depth yourself. But sometimes to me, like I think I need to watch his more recent films because I have not seen The French Dispatch either. But sometimes like I think too many people online distill Wes Anderson to just aesthetics, and that's not true. I think his films have like interesting characters and have a lot of like heart and emotion.
Yeah, very cool themes as well.
And like the notions of his aesthetics have been like really commercialized and like done to death, which
TikTokified.
Yeah.
Every other week I see a new TikTok of like making myself Wes Anderson, and it's always the most sort of cursory like view of his work. So like what you say are contemporary filmmakers that still embody campist thoughts?
What are modern filmmakers who embody? I'll be honest, I think most of the like recent camp aesthetic that I've seen have been in music videos.
Oh,
yeah. And I'm not. Who were you just telling me about, Fabiola? The that does all of Olivia Rodrigo's stuff.
Oh, Petra Collins.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's
great shout. Yeah, music videos. Yeah. Sadly, a dying art with newer generations didn't need to appreciate it as much as I did growing up. But like, yeah, I could see music videos being the last vestige of camp in modern culture, because it seems like it's the only place where like artifice and bombast aren't sort of like bad things.
Yeah.
To shy away from. Yeah.
I feel like you've told me you see some like have talked about modern camp filmmakers, haven't you, Fabiola? I feel like we've had that conversation before, but now I'm blanking what your response was.
I feel like in regards to modern contemporary camp, it's more often individual films rather than overall filmmakers.
Yeah.
Like I would say that the Barbie movie is camp, but I'm not sure that Greta Gerwig's.
Oh yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Yeah, that's my bias as a sort of like film fan that leaked through, because I was thinking of like, okay, whose vision aligns with camp? But I just said like 10 seconds ago that you can't set out to make something camp. It's just a byproduct of
we've thank God John Waters is still with us, but it's like, when was the last time he made a film? It's been a while.
The early 2000s.
Yeah.
I would say it's funny, we actually forgot to talk about like current events and stuff. You just brought up Barbie, and like that's been such a, I've been seeing like hot war fought on my timeline over Barbie. Like, from both extremes of people who can't decide whether it's like the savior or the pariah, and there's been so much so it's just one of those things where I see so many like interesting things being said from opponents and proponents, and I almost feel like I feel like Tito, because I can't decide who I want to support. But like I personally I watched it like on release like everyone else. I really enjoyed it. I didn't think, I was scared that it wouldn't be I was scared that it wouldn't be good, because I truly wanted both Barbie and Oppenheimer to be good. Like that was something very important to me. And I was very glad that like both of them were successful. But the sort of on both sides, I've seen like some very sycophantic like views on it that I feel it do a disservice to it. Sort of people sort of bringing too much of their preconceptions to it and not really meeting it where it's at in a very frustrating way. And I feel like there's still ways to be sort of like critical and like praiseworthy about this movie without necessarily bringing so much like extra textual context. So you can just really, you can watch it as a movie and there's still so much to say in the movie. That's really been it's almost frustrating that people aren't talking about the actual movie enough. They're just talking about outside stuff. I'm just like, is anyone going to discuss what happened in this movie? Because what happened in this, but like people are talking about outside stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, I guess that's just how it goes. But like, yeah, and that has been really interesting to see. Barbenheimer in general. I don't know if it's going to save cinema, but I definitely appreciate that for once a big movie has come out and people are talking about the actual movie and not like what it sets up or the next Easter egg reference. Just movies coming out and people talking about them feels like a sea change.
Are there any like final thoughts on End of Eternity?
Yeah, you go first.
I don't have something very concise. I just like it. I just like it, and I think I know I do. It's not like the kind of film that I'd like recommend to everyone, because like, you know, it takes its time and sometimes that's not people's thing, but I absolutely, it's such a nice, like, in terms of thinking about science fiction as a genre, it's nice to remember that it's about relationships and it's about society, and it always is. That's what the genre is, and at its true best. And so yeah, I my final word is watch it. And it's my reminder that I'm finally going to search out and watch Solaris, because I've been meaning to watch that forever, and it was in my YouTube recommendation after I finished.
Yeah, like casual reminder that this movie is free on YouTube. Like in 2011, Mosfilm put like hundreds of their classics on the internet to watch for free forever, English subtitles. Like in this era of like stuff being kicked off streaming networks and like it's so nice to see a like film studio that cares about like archiving and like access and stuff. So, and I guess my own final thoughts would be just general echoing the same sentiments. Like I was actually kind of nervous for this episode because I wasn't sure if you guys would like it. Like it was a very like out there recommendation. And obviously, there's not many types of these films that you discussed before. So like, I was kind of like, oh my God, what are they going to think and stuff? But like, yeah, I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it. And like, I would just say that if you're feeling jaded about like modern sci-fi blockbuster action adventure movies, like especially with respect to like time travel and multiverse, like you can just watch this to just remind yourself that like it's nothing to do with the genre itself, and it's just everything like the applications with the preconceptions with the approach, like have the right approach to these stories, you can really make something special. And I really loved everything about just the visuals, the sound, just cinema as a like art form is really embodied in this movie. Like obviously the performances are fantastic. The actor for Noise especially was just my favorite performance of the entire. It felt like she stole every single scene, every line delivery, like the fashion and hair choices for her with like the bangs and the lipstick and the sort of like dresses that she wore were just really great. Like just really great movie. And even though 70% of the movie is like old Soviet men walking around office buildings, it was still so compelling to watch, and it was still so the sense of like dramatic stakes were still conveyed so well. it was just really it was really well realized world. I even saw that there was like one black actor who was like a background person, but like he was just there, and I was like, damn, that's cool. That like in 1987 in a Soviet movie, they could think like, yeah, let's just have a black actor here because this is like eternity post history. Yeah, there can be anybody inside this place. So yeah, it was really cool. There's some really great filmmaking in this. There's really great like VFX shots. There's a really cool there's just very great filmmaking in this. And like the final, you owe it to yourself to watch this movie and just see the final, the ending.
Yeah.
Because the ending isn't a monologue, it isn't a montage, it is just like a scene that is accompanied only by the score. And the score is just like indescribable.
Yeah.
And somehow conveys exactly everything that they want you to feel watching that ending. And it just the experience of watching it for the first time is really something that is, I think, no matter how you feel about the movie, you will tell yourself that there's not that many movies like this, which is like always worth experiencing. It's my final thoughts. I struggle so much to be concise.
Yeah, to me that this film shows at least something that I feel like I talk about a lot or think about a lot, which is that a film can be really thoughtful and philosophical and dense while also looking really fun. Like it still can have the blinking red lights and the fun outfits while still being this very serious film at the same time.
And I can just add to that like a movie being like serious and about serious topics doesn't mean that it can't be like sincere and it can't be earnest. Like everything doesn't have to be like super cynical or super ironic or super detached. Like they can still be joy, they can still be like earnestness in like the both in the story and in the characters. Like everybody wears their hearts on their sleeves. There's not that many sort of duplicitous characters. Everyone is who they say they are for the most part. Some people like withhold, but no one really is overly two-faced or anything like that. It's just a very straightforward movie. Like what you see is what you're getting, and it was fun to watch.
Yeah, this is such a fun discussion. This is really good.
Thank you so much for guesting. I loved hearing everything that you had to say about this.
I know I talked for quite a while sometimes, but like it just I was just excited to
that's what guests are for.
That's what this podcast is for. Well, is there any last, you mentioned your Twitter at the top. Is there any last thing that you want to plug?
Yeah, I guess I draw a comic I draw a comic. It's called 12 Saints, and I post it online for free to read. And yeah, that's the main thing I spend most of my time on. And like I guess I'm proud of it. It's like it kind of embodies sort of like the same thing that we've talked about of like it's sort of like a fantasy comic, but like from the perspective of like my politics, which are a lot less sympathetic to monarchies and kingdoms and a lot more sympathetic to like the radical movements and that sort of thing. So like but still embodying all the same sensibilities of the comics that I grew up reading. So yeah, that's yeah, I guess I draw a comic and like it's free to read online. So you can find it on my Twitter. So yeah, that's the main thing.
I guess that's it for this episode.
Yes.
It's Giving Camp, hosted by Saffron and Hefta-Gaub
and Fabiola Liaño.
Our theme music is written by Harrison Lurie.
And the podcast is edited by Fabiola Liaño.
Follow us on Patreon. Support us on Patreon.
On Instagram, it's Giving Camp Pod. And on Twitter, it's Giving Camp Pod. Without it's. We're on Patreon at It's Giving Camp Pod, and shout out to our patron, Nicole Venito.